Two big pieces of news from the Labour Party conference here in Liverpool. The Home Secretary says she will change the system so that immigrants have to do more to earn the right to stay in the UK. And Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, warned of some tough choices ahead at the budget because of the global economic situation. What does it all mean? What does it all add up to? We'll try and work that out on this episode of the BBC's daily news podcast, Newscast. Hello, it's Adam at the Labour Party conference in Liverpool.
Hello, it's Alex, also at the Labour Party conference in Liverpool.
And Chris in Liverpool too.
So I used to hate when I was covering these things on a daily basis when the presenter would say, so what's the mood at Labour Party conference? Because there's always like multiple moods and depending on who you're asking.
Yeah.
Well, Alex, what's the mood at Labour Party conference?
Well,
You've been here forever.
It's a better question today than Saturday when no one was here and everyone was asking me what the mood was. And I was like, the mood's me in an empty room right now.
Kind of bleak.
Yeah, kind of bleak. I don't know, it's kind of hard in it because actually it does feel a bit like a tale of two conferences. There's the kind of mood that's coming out from the speeches that are made on the main conference floor and then the reaction in the room, which today, for example, around Rachel Reeves, there was like a really quite warm reaction from the delegates to what was quite an upbeat speech from the Chancellor. And then there's the stuff that you get in the kind of bars and cafes and around the edges of the conference. And I think there is definitely a sense of frustration about Labour's first year in government and what many see as kind of missteps and mistakes. And I think there's a kind of like hopefulness that the party can kind of pull it back given their ratings in the polls, but maybe a touch of scepticism in the mix as well.
I think it's exactly that. And then a sense of this overriding mood over and above, you know, their opponents and reform and all of that, of trying to, and I know we've said this so many times, but I just think it's the recurring theme of definition, of saying things a little more sharply or sometimes considerably more sharply. And then I think today, for me, the sort of two takeaways was the Chancellor very, very warmly received in the hall, doubling down on what has been her economic strategy all along and using that as a comparator, whether it be with Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, and his argument about moving to the left, or indeed with the Conservatives and reform. And then Shabana Mahmood, the new Home Secretary, and a noticeably more robust approach, as she sees it, to the whole question of migration, legal and illegal.
And worth saying, just on the mood in the hall, a much less kind of warm reception for the Shabana Mahmood speech than there was for Rachel Reeves, given the content.
Although Shabana Mahmood knew that in advance because she actually said in her speech, you aren't going to like some of the things I'm going to end up doing.
Yeah. And they listened politely. There wasn't any heckling, but it wasn't rapturous either. There was the odd bit of applause here and there, but it's a difficult message for the kind of typical Labour delegate, I suspect, here.
Should we do the two big speeches in reverse order from how they actually happened? Because Rachel Reeves was at lunchtime, then Shabana Mahmood was mid-afternoon. Shabana Mahmood, the two things that jumped out at me as kind of things from that in terms of decisions or things she's going to do. One was, we sort of knew about already, was changing indefinite leave to remain. So this status you can get after you've been in the UK for a certain time as a migrant. She fleshed out the Labour version of changing that policy.
Yeah, and in particular, and they haven't yet worked out the kind of metrics of how they measure this, but in particular this idea that you add in what is a kind of, if you like, qualitative factor to the whole business of whether someone should qualify for indefinite leave to remain, which is, they say, all about demonstrating a kind of connection and being plugged into your local community. What kind of voluntary work might you have done, for instance? Now, I know when I speak to people in the Home Office about, okay, people locally might kind of get what that looks and feels like, but how on earth as a Home Office, when you're confronted by applications, do you judge that in paper terms or in the digital equivalent of paper terms? Answer at the moment, they don't know, because they're going to have to find that in a way that can be scrutinised and stands up to scrutiny, when almost by definition it is quite woolly. You know, what counts as a sufficient amount of volunteering? What else might count as something that counts as being also properly integrated or plugged into your community beyond salary?
If the person works for the NHS, do they also have to then do some volunteering on top of that to qualify? Questions like that.
Quite.
And then also the other thing that jumped out, and it was almost, it wasn't a throwaway line, but she didn't elaborate on it. She basically said the asylum system that we have and the set of international laws and norms might have to change, even though we've had them for a generation.
Yeah, and you know, when she first got that job in the reshuffle, so she's only really been in the post a few weeks, everybody assumed that she was suddenly going to get really tough on all of this stuff, and I think that's exactly what she was alluding to. There were no really specific details about it, but that message that you might not like everything I'm going to do was a very clear signal about where she was was heading, and it was all framed around this argument that she was trying to advance, that the only way to be, in her words, the open, tolerant society that we, sort of referring to all the Labour delegates sat in front of her, that we want, is to get secure borders. And I think that framing of it tells you exactly where she's at, and that very clear statement that you're not gonna love it, but I think it's right. And it's interesting that it's that kind of that sort of tension that you sometimes get at conferences, where are they speaking to the country or are they speaking to the party? And I think she was trying to convince the party, but not budging on what she thinks she needs to say to the country.
And the two specifics on that are going to be fascinating to watch is the ECHR, the European Convention on Human Rights, and the desired, certainly from her perspective, tweaks in terms of how that is interpreted in the UK, and also the Refugee Convention. And then what work, if any, can the government coordinate with other European countries that might have an instinct to go broadly in the same direction? And then if they can get that far, does what they suggest, because that would involve changing the law in the UK, is that palatable to Downing Street? Are they willing to make that leap? Now, logically, as things stand now, you would assume the answer to that might be yes, because they knew the nature of Shabana Mahmood's politics and her instincts in giving her that job, and they know they have to move the dial. But are they willing to do it if we get to that point? And there are some within the wider party who are sceptical at that point as to whether he would be willing to make that leap.
Well, especially if the Prime Minister spent all weekend saying Nigel Farage's plans in the same area are racist.
Yes, but the argument and line that they are determined to draw here, particularly on that specific around indefinite leave to remain, is that they argue there is a complete fundamental difference between changing rules for people who are in a process or starting a process, and changing rules for people who have gone through a process. In other words, the reform idea of it being retrospective, that people who have been granted indefinite leave to remain and therefore legally can stay here for as long as they like are then told, oh, actually, maybe you can't, versus those who are beginning that journey and then the rules are changing.
And I've actually been struck by how many cabinet ministers that I've asked on air who've repeated that language that the Prime Minister used quite readily. You know, nobody's shying away from that sentiment, despite the fact they are still then having to make quite a nuanced argument about the difference in their approach and Reform's approach, and then also quite a nuanced argument about being specific. They were referring to a Reform Party policy and not the supporters of Reform UK, which is the dangerous area.
And there's a bigger question that we don't know the answer to yet, which is, is the reform idea perceived to have gone too far, or is the depth of frustration and anger around the whole question of migration so deep and so profound that the median voter, or certainly enough to appeal towards Nigel Farage for him to be able to ultimately win, are willing to entertain that kind of prospectus, which is out there both in the UK context and in the international one?
And then time is very elastic in this building. If we rewind back what feels like 19 hours, but it's actually only about 3, Rachel Reeves did her speech at lunchtime. And yeah, Chris, you said it was a sort of restatement, and it did feel like quite a Rachel Reeves greatest hits, didn't it?
Yeah.
It's like saving steel, the new order for loads of ships from Norway, sticking to my fiscal rules, because actually there's nothing progressive about spending even more money on debt interest because you've borrowed loads more.
Yeah, I mean, I think the outwardly contradictory thing for the sort of fleeting viewer was a speech where the central riff was one of drawing a distinction between what she sees as the achievement of a Labour government versus the instincts of a Conservative one, whilst also saying that the Conservatives were utterly irrelevant. And you kind of think, well, why has she done that? And then, of course, there was the riff about reform in particular. And I think a lot of that framing around the Conservatives and Labour was principally for the party. It was principally talking to the Labour Party to say, effectively, you might be tempted by things that are more left-wing than we are doing, but look what we're actually doing, and the only reason we can do it, so she argues, is that they built a platform of a perception of economic credibility that was the gateway to allow them to win.
I also think that line that she repeated time and time again, which is don't let anybody tell you there's no difference between a Labour government and the Conservatives, was weirdly, keep with me on this, aimed at Reform, because, you know, a really clear line of attack from Reform is they're all the same. They're just all the same as the others. We're the different ones. And I think that was Rachel Reeves' sort of way of providing the Labour Party with a response to that attack from Reform. We're not the same as them. Look at what we're doing in government.
Particularly because the evidence suggests that people who have previously voted Labour are being attracted by Reform, and Reform are building elements of their policy prospectus around a kind of big state intervention, things that would be perceived to be on the left. So there is that battle about what is perceived to be a left or a right-wing party around particularly those who've been drawn to Reform having previously voted Labour.
And also, it is a fact of life at Labour Party conferences that quite often ministers have to remind their activists that being in government is quite good and it's worth it because you get to do stuff, and it might be like you have to do stuff you don't like, but like ultimately it is kind of better than not being in government.
Yeah,
they suspect
and Keir
quite a lot of
Starmer
them
likes
would
that line.
say.
He often says that, doesn't he? I'd much rather this than being in opposition. That's his like counter to when people go, God, it's really tough, isn't it? You're having a horrible time. And he's like, well, I'd much rather this than be in opposition. But I think the kind of double whammy for them, this Labour Party, this Labour government right now is still trying to persuade the party what they've done with their time in government, and that speaks to what is this fundamental problem for Labour right now, the criticism that comes from many quarters. They have not been clear enough about who they are, what they stand for and what they're doing, and I think that is why this kind of like repeating of the record and listing of the things they've done is not just about the look at what we can achieve if we're in government, but actually, guys, remember, we have achieved this stuff when we're in government. We might not have spelled it out that clearly, but we're going to try and start to do that.
Completely, and willing to demonstrate a bit of pride in what they see as their achievements, as opposed to a sort of defensive crouch. I was talking to one cabinet minister earlier who said, look, recent Conservative governments towards their tail end in power had issues around parliamentary arithmetic, basically, either because of sort of rebellions or because of just not having a great majority. And this minister was saying, the Labour restriction is the economic backdrop, is that they can't do what Labour governments are often tempted to do, which is to say, look, we're spending a lot more. Now, they would still argue they are doing, given what we heard from the Chancellor in the budget last year, but not as much as plenty in this hall would wish.
And I'm trying to think of what the word of this would be. Why don't you try and christen a word for it?
Okay.
When you start laying the groundwork for stuff that's going to be quite tricky further down the line, like the budget, but you don't want anyone to know that you're actually doing the groundwork, but you do want people to get the sense that there's going to be some tricky stuff coming down the line.
Well,
Is there
the
a word
phrase
for
that we all use is like rolling the pitch, right? But that's slightly rubbish, isn't it? I'll let Chris think on a better one while I tell you what Rachel Reeves actually did. So I think...
Make it a long answer, because I'm struggling here.
I mean, that's exactly what we got from Rachel Reeves today, because all of the tone, even though she was really quite upbeat in her actual speech, the messaging that sat behind it was really clear, which is that budget is going to be hard. And she also very, I think, clearly shifted the position on tax, where she was asked about this commitment that she made before, that we're not going to come back for loads more tax, like, we did that at the last budget, we're not going to do it again. She very obviously didn't repeat that today, and she referred to kind of global headwinds in the international economic picture, very much making it clear that we are in line for tax rises at the budget without being explicit about it and attempting not to set hairs running about which ones.
I've got an idea.
Oh, good.
I reckon it's like a weather forecaster a fortnight out from a bank holiday saying,
Yeah.
Yeah.
You got some jigsaws in.
It's not looking great. Exactly.
She's getting the jigsaws in.
Getting the
jigsaws
but not explicitly saying it's going to pour it down. But sort of.
Because jigsaws are a good thing to do anyway.
Well,
just to have on hand. Anyway, right. I think this is the perfect time to then let people hear the interview I've just done with Darren Jones, who in the reshuffle got a new job that was in itself a new job. He's the new Chief Secretary to Number 10 Downing Street. He also then got some other jobs added on top, which I then clarified with him when he sat down with us on Newscast. Darren Jones, hello.
Hello.
Right, technically, what is your job now? Because I remember the great fanfare when you were announced as the new Chief Secretary to Downing Street, but then it seemed like you got reshuffled.
No, I got more jobs.
You got more jobs?
Yeah, I have 3. So I'm now the Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, and the Minister for Intergovernmental Relations.
Oh, I didn't know about that third one.
Yeah.
And that's dealing with like the Scottish government and Wales.
First Ministers and the Deputy First Ministers.
Okay.
Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
Do you have a favourite out of the 3?
I love all of them equally. I love the fact that as the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, it is a private appointment from His Majesty the King to administer the duchy on his behalf. But the good news is I had to delegate those responsibilities quite quickly to someone qualified to look after his landed estate.
Does it come with any kind of like regal privileges?
I was given some very large seals in a red box, which the King gave me. And then I took from the palace And when I got back to the Cabinet Office, I was told I was definitely supposed to leave them at the palace.
Okay.
So it's lucky I've not been sacked already.
Okay, well, they say there's a problem with shoplifting these days. Does that mean, does the King have any privileges to kind of get in touch with you directly through all of that then?
I have a private audience with His Majesty at various points in the year
Right.
as his Chancellor for the Duchy. That's his private source of income.
Yeah.
But I think most of the administrative tasks, as I say, are handed off to other people.
Interesting. I want to ask you about helping to run Number 10 in a second, but just in terms of some of the stuff that's been announced at conference over the last few days, this focus on patriotism, I've noticed every single speech has the word patriotism in it.
Yes.
Do you all have like your own definitions of what being patriotic is? Is it up to you as a minister, or is there kind of like a centrally agreed version of it? Because it's quite a slippery concept, isn't it?
I suppose so. I mean, we haven't circulated like a Number 10 dictionary for people. So, like,
There are 10 things that make you patriotic.
Exactly. No, we're just saying we're proud of Britain in all of its forms and all of its diversity. And obviously, you know, the flag has been used recently as a kind of cover for racism, quite frankly. And we're just saying we're not going to allow our national symbols to be owned and used in that way. We want our symbols, whether it's flags for England, Scotland or Wales, or indeed the Union flag, to be one that's seen as inclusive and welcoming for everyone in Britain. And we make no apologies for wanting to own that in a patriotic and progressive way.
Okay, so people who are maybe dashing out onto a roundabout and painting a Union flag or a St George's Cross on there, they were in danger of being racist?
Well, they're in danger of being criminals because you shouldn't be graffitiing public street furniture. I mean, I'm all for people putting flags in their houses and their windows, like, crack on, no problem with me whatsoever, but don't cause criminal damage and don't use it as a disguise for racism and intimidation.
And when does it become racist then?
Well, when they are putting them alongside a graffitied swastika on a Chinese takeaway, that looks pretty racist to me. And when you're marching through the streets and shouting at people of different heritage, that feels pretty racist to me. Look, Britain is an inclusive country. The vast majority of people in Britain share those values. And I just think some of this activity is not welcome here, and we need to call it out.
I mean, it's interesting that you're using the word a lot more, and you're being a bit more kind of muscular with the stuff that you just said just now. Does that then translate into like a suite of new policies to promote kind of patriotic stuff, or is it just more of a frame of mind, more of an attitude?
I think it's part of the narrative of what we're trying to do as a government. So you've seen the slogan here at conferences about renewing Britain, a Britain renewed. You know, the place we're trying to take the country to is one where we've invested in our country, we've given people great opportunities in life, and people can feel hopeful about the future for them and their family and a Britain that is doing well in the world. And we think there's a big choice coming up at the next election and in this time in our politics between that type of patriotic, progressive politics and the politics of division and hatred, where you've got, quite frankly, all of these fake answers to the questions that people are really worried about.
Can somebody be a supporter of Nigel Farage and his policies and be patriotic but not racist?
Yes.
Right. So that's all possible.
Yeah, of course it's possible. I'm not saying the people that support Nigel Farage or Reform are all racist. I don't think that's true. But there are policies that he has announced, like this idea of he's going to round up everyone that's got indefinite leave to remain in the country and kick them out on the basis.
No, he's going to get them to apply for visas to stay.
And if they don't?
Well, then they would leave. Like, they'd be removed, like people are removed now.
Exactly. He'd round them up and kick them out. Includes my wife, by the way. I mean, look, these are people who have worked for years in our country, have set up their families here, work in the economy, pay their taxes, work in our schools and hospitals. And just because they weren't born in Britain, my wife was born in Australia, Nigel Farage is saying you're not welcome here. I mean, I'm just not sure that's what the British people really think should happen in our country.
You've got kids. Did you discuss that with your kids?
They're very little.
Oh yeah, actually they are quite tiny.
It'd be a bit dark for a 6-year-old. I think.
They're not tuning into politics live. Just
no. The 2-year-old might not mind, but the others not. No, not so much.
But I suppose they'd be in scope for it too, though, by logic.
Well, no, they're British citizens, so they're okay. They're okay, but you never know.
Right. Rachel Reeves' speech then, your old boss, the Chancellor, she talked about... No, did I do a screen grab of this next to my train tickets to get to Liverpool? Photos of conference.
Questions, get to the question. There it is.
Here we go. In the months ahead, we will face further tests, with the choices to come made all the harder by harsh global headwinds. What are the harsh global headwinds that exist now that didn't exist a year ago?
Well, a couple of things, I suppose. I mean, there's still a lot of unrest and war in the world that's having an impact on the cost of commodities and supply chains that affects costs in the UK.
Wars that were all happening last year as well.
Yeah, but things have not gotten better, and in some circumstances have gotten worse, and continued constraint on supply of, like, I don't know, take for example wheat or oil from Ukraine is resulting in higher prices in the UK economy. Of course, there's a lot of tariffs now in the world where we've gone past that age of globalization and free trade, which is having a direct effect on UK industries. And so what she was setting out is that as a government, we are stepping in where we can to support UK business and UK workers, but we can't control or dictate what's happening in the rest of the world, and that makes life harder.
And you were previously Chief Secretary to the Treasury, so you were working on the spending review. Maybe not so much involved, that job, you're not so much involved in the budget, are you?
No, I was involved,
okay.
yeah.
Would you be saying to the Chancellor now, if you were in that job now, we've got to put up some taxes because of these headwinds?
So I'm still involved in the budget, just from number 10 now, so I'm not going to answer your question, because of course the budget will come on the 26th of November, and we're not going to be able to dictate at this stage at party conference where that's going to get to.
Okay, very professional answer.
Thank you.
Which I was kind of exciting. Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. Although it is interesting though, because everyone is kind of obsessing over what Keir Starmer said yesterday on Laura's show about the manifesto and the pledges not to increase the rates of national insurance, income tax, or VAT. And he said the manifesto stands.
Yes.
And then some very sharp-eared people went, oh, he didn't say the manifesto will continue to stand. He's only talking about kind of the situation today or tomorrow, not by the time of the budget.
Yeah, look, and we always go around this in the run-up to budgets. It's the same conversation every year. The fact is that the budget gets presented to Parliament on Budget Day, which is the 26th of November. No Chancellor of any party is going to dictate in advance of that what decisions they may or may not have to take, for two reasons. One, it affects people's lives. It affects your mortgage, your interest rate on your credit card. It can affect your place of work. But also because we rely on official forecasts on the economy from the Office of Budget Responsibility, and we don't have those yet. So we've got to do...
Do you get them on Friday?
We get round one on Friday for fiscal, but there are a couple of rounds and they move around a bit.
Yeah.
So we genuinely won't be in a position to announce decisions we are yet to have to take until we get to the budget, and we can speculate around them, but the answers are broadly the same for good reason.
Yeah. Well, what do you want to say then about the status of the manifesto commitments today then, being the professional that you are?
Well, the manifesto stands, as the Prime Minister said, so we made these commitments for a reason, and judge us on our actions so far. You know, the last budget, the last spending review, we made decisions in different ways in order to stand up those manifesto commitments, which we were also criticised for. You know, charging employers more for their national insurance contributions asked a lot of business to contribute to get the public spending back on track, but we did it in that context, and as I say, any decisions one way or another will be taken at the budget at the end of November.
Just picking up on what you said about you're still involved in the budget, but from the number 10 kind of point of view.
Yeah.
Does it feel different, even though basically it's the same process, but you're looking at it from a different place?
Well, not.
You've got to be more political and less Treasury now, for example.
Well,
I'd hazard a guess.
I think everyone has to be political as well as fiscally responsible. I mean, look, the world is still the world. Just because I moved next door from one boss to another doesn't make life easier for us. I mean, that's for sure. But of course, the number 10 team, including me, including the Prime Minister, we meet with Rachel, the Chancellor, and her team multiple times a week right now to do the work, to make sure that we're set up to be able to make decisions when we need to and then deliver a successful budget.
Are you psychologically ready to potentially overrule the Chancellor? Because she might want to do something that number 10 doesn't want to do.
I don't think we're going to end up in that type of position. Keir and Rachel have got a brilliant relationship, and sometimes that's a bit of give and a bit of take, but they work together very, very closely. It's not for me to overrule the Prime Minister or the Chancellor. They're both...
If you were following the Prime Minister's instructions, you might do it.
I think the Prime Minister, if we were ever in that set of circumstances, would do that himself, to be fair.
And I suppose you'd want to avoid that. I mean, then we'd write about it.
Well,
because we'd find out about it and then we'd write about it.
But also, it's not good government, right? I mean, they get on with each other. They work very closely with each other. I'm working across both of those teams with everyone to make sure that they're in exactly the same place in their thinking.
Yeah.
And they're grown-ups, right? So they build each other's views on issues as we're working through it. And the Chancellor's the Chancellor and the Prime Minister's the Prime Minister, and they respect each other's position on that.
Me and Faisal Islam had quite a long chat on Newscast last week about this issue of productivity and the Office of Budget Responsibility. Give us a way of thinking about what the OBR are doing with their numbers around productivity and what that could mean for everyone.
Yeah, look, it's quite a complicated conversation, really. What is productivity? It's how effective we are at producing things, goods or services, and it's a measure of our economic kind of agility or performance. And the OBR tries to predict that into the future, And they will give us forecasts not just on spending, which we call the fiscal forecast, but on this issue, and they call that the economic forecast. We need to wait to see what their conclusions are, so I can't give you a kind of quantified answer, but they will be looking backwards as well as forwards to see whether their guesses have been right or not.
Yeah.
And sometimes they revise it up, and that means that we've been better, and therefore we've got more growth. Sometimes they revise it down and say they got it wrong.
But it looks like they're going to revise it down. All the hints that they give us when they talk about it is that they've been over-optimistic in the past.
Right, I mean, maybe. I mean, the OBR is independent of government, so they'll need to talk to that to themselves. If that is the case...
But it can cost billions, can it? Their decisions can have well, it's not so much a cost, but like a change to your calculations
It's
of
an accounting
billions.
cost, yeah, it's an accounting cost. And look, if they've made a mistake and they need to change it, they need to justify that and explain why they've ended up in that set of circumstances. And then beyond pure accounting terms, like if there is a fundamental problem that we have not properly understood in the economy, it's our job in government, and in a slightly different way, the bank governor at the Bank of England, to then understand that and grapple with it.
Yeah, but you would have to make fiscal decisions, so tax and spend policy, on the basis of if they do a downgrade. So you will have to make decisions on the basis of what the OBR say about productivity.
Yeah. So on productivity and on spending, the OBR will give us an updated view, because remember that each budget isn't just for a year; it points out quite a few years. So it'll point out to 2030. So if in the past they've predicted we're going to get a certain amount of tax income because the economy's produced a certain amount of output, and now they change their mind, we can't bank on that coming in the same way. So you need to move around based on their forecast.
Do a bit of interpretation for me. In Rachel Reeves' speech, she talked about the youth mobility scheme with the EU, which I think was a youth experience scheme when it was agreed in principle with the EU earlier this year. Did she say anything new today? Because she sort of touted it as if she was saying something that we hadn't heard before, but I feel like we knew it was happening.
So we got agreement with the EU that we were going to negotiate a new scheme.
Yeah, so we knew that.
The thing that's changed is we've now agreed the negotiating mandate. Is a bit wonky, really, but basically we're now in
Not here, it isn't.
Not here. Well, I'm in very good company. So we're now in active conversations with counterparts in the EU about the design of that scheme.
Yeah. And it sounds like she wants to go for like the maximalist version, so the biggest age range of people and the biggest number of years that they could do the mobility for.
Well, because it's a question of opportunity, right? And the former scheme we had when we were part of the EU, this Erasmus scheme, gave lots of people brilliant opportunities to spend time in other European countries, to learn different languages, to try different experiences. And we want the same type of opportunity for people now. The difference now we've left the EU is it does need to be time limited and capped in terms of its number. In both directions, and that's the type of detail that we're now working out with our European counterparts.
And it sounds like Rachel Reeves wants it to be the maximum number of people that any scheme could be.
Well, the maximum is unlimited, and we're not going back to free movement.
Okay.
So I think the total cap is, as I say, part of the debate we're now having with the EU.
And then Shabana Mahmood's first conference speech as Home Secretary, she painted out so her own reforms to indefinite leave to remain, like we were discussing with Reform's position earlier. She seems to have now painted, there's going to be so many different versions of it. Like, you can get it earlier if you've contributed to your community. You might never get it at all if you've claimed some benefits. So is everyone going to be assessed on an individual basis on loads of different criteria with lots of potentially different outcomes for the indefinite leave to remain in the future?
So we have to consult on how that's going to work. What Shabana announced at conference this year was a number of things. One, the qualifying period will go from 5 years to 10 years.
Before you can even get it.
Yeah, subject to the outcome of the consultation. There's already a 10-year route for some people, but other people can do 5 years, so it will just go to a standard 10. And then we will start to weigh in factors around your job, your contribution, including voluntary and community work, which is new, and I think that's welcome by people, and also your proficiency in the English language. The key thing for all of these schemes is you make it as clear as possible for people, so they know that if they are coming here to work and set up their family life, legitimately within the rules, it's a clear scheme to navigate.
It might be clear, but isn't it going to be a much more bureaucratic scheme to deliver? Because at the moment it's a bit more one size fits all, isn't it?
I'm not sure. I mean, it's pretty bureaucratic now. I mean, the forms are impossibly complicated. They're very long. It's very expensive. You make one tiny mistake and the whole thing gets cancelled and you start again. I mean, I've actually filled out these forms in my own family circumstances. So I think the whole thing is quite hard. But what we're trying to do is get the balance right between, on this question of fairness, what British people would expect people coming in to meet in terms of their contribution to the country in order to then have the privilege to be able to stay here.
And what do we think the English language qualification will be?
I don't know.
Right.
I think at the moment
That's
there's
part of the consultation, or?
Well, maybe. I mean, there's an English proficiency test already, and you have to do like a, at the moment you have to do a test on your understanding of English history, which I was hopeless at, but my wife was actually remarkably very good at. I didn't know the answers to any of these questions.
Really?
So it's already quite difficult. And so maybe you should have a go at it on your podcast.
I will do, yeah.
People, if they can pass the test.
Is it almost like a sort of points-based immigration system, but for ILR?
I suppose you could describe it in that way. Like I said, the design of the scheme we've got to consult on.
Yeah.
I think most of our schemes are points-based in some way, and that you've got to meet certain criteria in order to qualify. But as I say, Shabana's going to consult on the precise details of how it's going to work.
And also, I wonder when it will actually kick in, because you were talking about giving people some certainty about what rights they will be entitled to. I mean, presumably somebody who's 3 years into their stay in the UK could be expecting indefinite leave to remain in 2 years. You wouldn't want to. Would you want to move the goalposts with just a couple of years to go for somebody?
I don't think we'd be allowed to do that. So I think current applicants will be working on the current scheme.
Okay.
We would have to consult, then change the rules, and then apply the rules so that people were very clear and had a reasonable expectation of what the scheme is that they're
so this could be like 7 or 8 years away.
No, it shouldn't be that long. I mean, it depends how long the consultation is. Then you need a bill in Parliament.
But if you're not applying it to people who are here.
No, they'll be under the current rules.
Yeah. No. So I mean, so at the moment, you get indefinite leave. This is now getting incredibly detailed, but you get indefinite leave to remain after 5 years in most cases, don't you? Of settlement in the UK.
Yes.
Does that mean somebody who arrives during this consultation period, before the new system's in place, will be under the old system?
Yes.
So therefore, the first person to be judged under Shabana's new rules will be in several years more than 5 years' time.
Well, it'll be when the new rules are legally applied, which I think is fair, right? I mean, you can't tell people that they might be under a scheme in the future that Parliament hasn't agreed to yet.
No, I'm just trying to, in my head, work out when actually the first person to be kind of judged on these new rules.
What I can't give you is the precise date now, because it will be subject to the consultation, the response, and then the legal change.
Yeah, sure. No,
but look, Shabana's pretty clear she wants to do that as quickly as possible, so I suspect we're going to drive that quite hard.
Yeah.
So it won't be 7 or 8 years. It'll be within this Parliament, I suspect, is what she'll want to try to get on.
Now, talking about driving, what was it like getting your hands on the steering wheel of government, number 10 Downing Street?
Slow. Too slow.
The process was too slow, or government is too slow?
Everything is too slow.
Right.
And too old school, basically. So
give me an example.
I'll give you an example. So I was, I won't give you the topic, but I was asked to get involved. I had to sit in the chair to drive something that was deemed important. And the way in which you do that is you get the Secretary of State and the Permanent Secretary, the two top dogs from all the departments around the table. And then we've all got pieces of paper that our officials tell us to what to say. And my job is to point at them and say, what are you doing on this? And they say, I'm doing this thing. And I'm like, okay, that's great. Can you do more? And they say, yes. And you just read out pre-agreed lines, and you go away, and then you come back a week later. I mean, it's totally hopeless.
Yeah, it sounds a bit Amdram.
Well,
like a really bad play.
Or a bit passive-aggressive, I suppose. Yeah. I'm much more interested in getting the right people in the room from across departments and outside government, using technology and data much more effectively to really understand the problem, and quite frankly, to lock the door and say you're not coming out until you figured out the answer. And then once you figured out the answer, we're just going to get on with it, as opposed to setting up more process or more. And can you
give me an example of that happening?
Well,
too soon.
It's too soon. I've been in the job 3 weeks.
Yeah.
What I've done is I've created.
1 week has been this.
And 1 week has been this podcast.
Although it sometimes feels like 3 weeks.
Yeah. So I've created the space in the Cabinet Office now for those meetings to happen.
Right.
We're not just going to be around kind of stuffy Cobra tables anymore. We've got this great space opposite my office where we're going to bring people in and kind of take this more nimble approach with more junior staff and frontline staff as well as big wigs.
Yeah.
And be very crystal clear and focused on what the priorities are of this government, which represents the priorities of the British people.
And anything else about how Number 10 operates that you've changed? I mean, I remember knowing somebody who works in Number 10 and going for a drink with them a few years ago, and they took out this little piece of paper which was the list of all their meetings for the next day. Because they were having like these little cards printed every day of their day.
Yeah, that happens.
Still do that?
Well, that happens quite a lot. I don't have that because it's pointless. My diary moves around in real time.
Yeah.
And I don't want someone running around printing this thing out every 5 seconds. Also, I don't use my little red box thing. I think that's a bit
Isn't that one of the perks?
Well, it's a bit Disney, isn't it? I mean, can you imagine me getting on the train to go to Bristol with this enormous red thing which says the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster on it? I mean, I use Microsoft OneNote and it works perfectly fine on my laptop.
And do you ever have to be like a critical friend to the Prime Minister and maybe suggest to him he's being, I don't know, say whatever you want? Do you ever have to sort of like nudge him a bit? Or is it very much like you're his delivery guy?
Well, both. I mean, Keir is totally open to being challenged. Like, he's not precious about that at all. And one of the things I think he likes from the approach that I take to working with him is it's quite we're both lawyers. He's a barrister, I'm a solicitor. You have to present...
So you're used to being instructed, but the other way around. Now, which way around does it work in the law?
Well,
who's the boss there?
Well,
anyway, we digress.
Well, the barristers always think they're the boss, but it's the solicitors bringing the money in. But in this circumstance, basically, it's my job to make sure we're surfacing the most important political trade-offs and decisions for him as Prime Minister to understand and make. And my job is to make sure that we've got all that information, we explain it very clearly to him, he tells me what he wants as Prime Minister, and then my job is to go and get on with it. If I have a different view, or I have a different risk appetite, or I'm worried about the politics, or some of the personalities, I feel perfectly fine to say to him, I worry about these things, and I think you might want to consider them, and he's totally open to having that conversation. So it works really well.
Yeah, and do you find yourself having to be quite tough with your colleagues around the cabinet table sometimes, which you were famously as Chief Secretary?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think they all respect...
I'm not trying to get at like fights or anything like that. I'm just intrigued about how it
There's no fights. I mean, I'm really desperate not to have the kind of head prefect vibe going on when you come in with your badge and you're like, I had teachers said you've got to do this, so go and do it. Like, it's a collaborative culture. Ultimately, my job is to help my colleagues all around the cabinet table to make progress. So if there is conflict or disagreement, I need to bring people together, look at the facts, and try to get to a point of decision. And if that decision is sometimes not the ones that one of my colleagues want, then tough. Sometimes it is, and that's great. But ultimately, we've made a decision, and then we can get on with delivery, which is ultimately what everyone is interested in.
And do you want to give us a bit of a preview of the Prime Minister's speech tomorrow? I mean, I'm not talking about the details, but is it like a big vision thing? Is it a list of interesting new policies? Where is it?
More on the vision side. It's going to be a big speech that's talking about the point that we are at in our country now, this choice, which I think I've already said on your podcast, but I've been on now for so long I can't remember if it was this interview or another one.
Attitude.
I'm
giving you this massive platform.
I know, I'm sorry, I'm enjoying myself.
Anyway.
This choice the country has about a future that is about renewing Britain, that is about progressive patriotism, or going down the path of division and decline, where we bring hatred and otherism into our politics and actually don't really have credible answers to the questions that people care about. And we're seeing that bubble up already in our politics, some time out from the general election. But the Prime Minister will make it very clear that's a political battle we need to tackle head on and win now, and not just wait until 2029 in order to have that.
Right, we should be listening. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
So that was Darren Jones explaining how he's moved some seats around in number 10 Downing Street. And to give him his credit, it does sound like more than that. But also just giving a bit more fuel to that whole get your jigsaws ready for the rainy bank holiday vibe, if not that exact metaphor. Right, so we're recording this episode of Newscast at tea time on Monday. So we've had some big speeches today, but the biggest one of them all is on Tuesday, late morning, early afternoon, Keir Starmer. We got a little bit of a preview from Darren Jones there. It sounds like it's going to be like a big vision thing rather than like, here are 10 policies we're going to roll out to make you feel happy.
Yes, so they have been saying, those around the Prime Minister, for a good couple of weeks now, this will be the moment where nobody leaves uncertain about what the Prime Minister stands for. Now, I must admit, I heard pretty similar briefing before his speech this time last year, which I think tells you a lot about where he finds himself and where this party finds itself, and at least part of the reason why the party's in a bit of a funk, because senior folk, including around the cabinet table, privately talk about how long he's got left and whether or not, particularly the other side of those elections next May, local elections in England, devolved elections in Scotland and Wales, frankly, whether he's still Prime Minister at the conference this time next year. So I think there'll be a lot of that about who he is. There'll be a lot, which we've already heard, about what he sees as the battle of a generation between Labour and Reform. I think an underlying riff will be the sense that people got very fed up of the previous government chopping and changing prime ministers. Hint, hint. Those dots don't take too much joining. and say that challenge is the challenge that the party faces, and that he should be the sort of the figurehead of it. And no doubt as well a bit of a riff about he's been in a few tight corners before politically and has come back from them, which he has. You know, we know that he considered resigning after that by-election back in 2021 in Hartlepool and went on to be Prime Minister. So I think that'll be the thrust of it.
Alex, have you had any sightings of Andy Burnham today?
No, not personally, but he has been around again today. And so I've lost track of days already. So Sunday night,
Monday,
when
today.
he was sort of first caught sight of at the conference with all the frenzy that's now following around since he said what he said about potential leadership and all that stuff, he did nothing to kind of dampen that fire when he gave this line about simplistic loyalty, doesn't really get to the heart of the debate that we need to have in the party. I think today, from what I've picked up, and I haven't seen him personally, but I've been reading all of the lines that have come in when he's done various appearances, that he does seem to be saying that, you know, I'm not running to be leader right now because I'm not an MP and I'm in Manchester. I think almost trying to kind of like maybe dampen down the immediate speculation that he's sort of, you know, on the verge of throwing his hat in the ring despite the complicated process he'd have to go through to get there, is my sense of what he's been saying. But interestingly, he's also kind of been defending his approach on the economy, because Rachel Reeves gave that little rebuke in her speech. It was widely seen as a kind of pushback to Andy Burnham when she said those who just want to spend, you know, might want to think twice. I'm massively paraphrasing that. But, you know, Andy Burnham has sort of been saying, look, that was never my intention. I was sort of saying you could maybe look at flexibility around the fiscal rules and change them a bit rather than ditch them altogether. So the kind of argument of ideas continues, but my sense is that he's not, as he was on Sunday, perceived to be still very much in that like.
And it's a really, I mean, there's some pretty acidic views amongst Labour MPs about how he's gone about things in the last week.
I mean, that's really quite extraordinary, picking up some of that.
Oh, yeah, there's a lot of it, including from people who like him and one day would like to see him as leader. But then from his perspective, I think we were talking about this the other day on Newscast, you know, what do you do if you're in his shoes? You know, you've been mayor of Greater Manchester for a fair old while. He's always been open about his ambitions. You can't run from the leadership from where he currently is politically. Getting to a position where you could is not remotely easy, but you want to be in the mix, and there is this very real conversation going on in the party that suggests that the Prime Minister might have a shorter shelf life than people would have assumed not that very long ago. And so is there a danger of underplaying? Yes, not a danger he has walked too close to in the last week. Is there a danger of overplaying? Yes. And the view of plenty is that that's what he's done. But what would have been the alternative? Sort of being underplayed and not examining what appetite there might be, or flushing out very publicly that he'd be up for a route back were one to emerge that looked credible and winnable. Two massive questions, by the way. So, you know, that, and the reason it matters, as we said before, is that it's symptomatic of the wider conversation. A government that was flying high and doing well in the polls and elsewhere, Andy Burnham's ambitions would still be real, but the credibility of the Prime Minister under threat wouldn't be. And the fact is it is, and therefore this is happening. And by the way, there's other people who are a little more subtle, but are already in Parliament, who are very alive to where we are right now as well.
Intriguing. And just to bring it back to Keir Starmer, I think, not that it's my job to give him a big test, but I think one of the tests I'll be listening out for in his speech tomorrow is if he wants to major on this idea of patriotism, can he come up with a really quotable definition of what that actually means? Because he did that speech on Friday with all the other progressive leaders, as they would call it, from around the world. And his definition of patriotism he did there was like, quite hard to remember and keep in your head, and it had a lot of words and a lot of subclauses and a lot going on in it. I wonder if over the last few days has he been able to just really boil that down into something that you could put on a sticker.
The most striking image I keep seeing around this conference is the still image of rural England, I assume. I've actually asked the party where it is. Don't know yet.
Bulgaria. Wrong clip art, guys. No,
but it's a picture of rural England, and it seems to me that is, if you like, as they might see it, and the understated patriotism they're trying to engender when there's this arguably noisier, more angry articulation of it from some others.
But isn't that the whole thing? can Keir Starmer define clearly what he's trying to say? And that sort of has been the thing that's been hanging over him for the past 14 months or so. So it's not for you or I to set tests for Keir Starmer, but it will be interesting to see what he comes up with.
The image I keep being confronted with is the giant life-size plastic giraffe over there.
Yes.
It's representing Chester Zoo.
It's kind of handily by the entrance to where all the media sits.
Yeah,
So if
we're
you
never
get lost in the conference, you
exactly.
just look for the giraffe.
I was joking last night with one of the cleaners as I was leaving at 11 o'clock at night because he was doing his sort of vacuuming right underneath the giraffe, and it kind of looked like the giraffe had either dropped everything he was hoovering up, or was there as some sort of cleaning inspectorate, making sure that the floor was spotless.
Very engaged giraffe.
Which it was. If you look over your shoulder at this giant beast.
And that is all from the zoo that is Newscast at the Labour Party conference in Liverpool. We'll be back with another episode from here very soon. Bye-bye.